An assault in progress at Acer Plaza. Repeat, an assault in progress. It's a war zone down here. 1085 dispatcher, need additional units. Additional units now. Officer in danger. Officer in danger.
10-5, please repeat. 10-5, all units, emergency. Officer in danger, Acer Plaza, repeat. Acer Plaza, all units.
They were all dead. The final gunshot was an exclamation mark to everything that had led to this point. I released my finger from the trigger, and then it was over. Kind of sense of it, I need to go back 3 years. Back to the night the Payne started. I was still on the force back then. NYPD, Manhattan, Midtown North Precinct, Hell's Kitchen.
So when are you coming to work for me, Detective Payne?
You'd make me work undercover in some hellhole. Sorry, Alex. Michelle and the baby come first. See? My last smoke. It's bad for the baby.
That's you, Max. A regular Boy Scout.
See, Alex.
Still on for poker Thursday night, right?
Like taking candy from a baby. Life was good. The sun setting on a sweet summer's day. Smell of freshly mowed lawns. Sounds of children playing. A house across the river on the Jersey side. Beautiful wife and a baby girl. The American dream come true. Honey, I'm home. But dreams have a nasty habit of going bad when you're not looking. The sun went down with practiced bravado. Twilight crawled across the sky, laden with foreboding. Honey, anybody home? I didn't like the way the show started. They'd give me the best seat in the house, front row center. What the hell?
Welcome back to McKiLL TV.
Tattooed on the wall.
Today we're looking back on yet another beloved retro game that 22 years ago sparked the birth of a new franchise. A dark, noir tale of revenge and retribution as we look back on the genius of Max Payne.
Yes, someone's broken into my house.
Max Payne was developed by Remedy Entertainment and picked up and published by Rockstar Games.
Hello.
The game originally released in July of 2001, and roughly 1 year later released on the Sony PS2 and Microsoft Xbox, with a Dreamcast port of the game being cancelled due to the discontinuation of that console. But the game later also received ports on the Game Boy Advance, iOS, and Android in 2012. And later the game received ports on Xbox One, Xbox Series X, as well as the PS4. So the game is pretty much available on most consoles at this point.
No, please God, no.
Max Payne is a third-person shooter action game that centers on former NYPD detective Max Payne, in which the game is named after. Max attempts to solve the murder of his family, who was murdered by drug addicts at the beginning of the game. While investigating drug trafficking case involving a new designer drug known as Valkyr. But while doing so, Max becomes entangled in a large, complex conspiracy involving a major pharmaceutical company, organized crime, a secret society, and the US military.
That was 3 years ago. Everything ripped apart in a New York minute. The killer junkies have been
The game features a gritty neo-noir style storytelling and uses graphic novel style panels to convey a story, with its voiceovers being the main means of dialogue throughout the game, drawing hard inspiration from detective novels. The game contains many allusions of Norse mythology, and particularly the myth of Ragnarok.
I went undercover.
While its gameplay is heavily influenced by Hong Kong action cinema movies, and is one of, if not the first game of its time to use bullet time mechanics, which is most likely influenced by the Matrix films. A lot of gameplay centers around the game's bullet time mechanic, especially during firefights, and when triggered, time is slowed down to such an extent that bullets and other projectiles are slowed as well, making them visible to the naked eye. And although Max's movement is slowed down as well, the player is still able to move and react, allowing for more time to plan and react to enemies with more precision. The player is initially armed with a 9mm Beretta pistol, but as the game progresses, many other weapons quickly become available, with Max being able to dual wield for an increase in firepower at the cost of higher ammo consumptions. Unlike other games, Max is no bullet sponge, and in fact can only take a limited amount of damage before being killed. But Max can replenish his health by consuming painkillers that can be found in medical cabinets across many locations in levels and occasionally dropped by enemies at crucial moments.
Jack Lapino was crazy, all right. The table was scattered with notes of demented arcane nonsense written in rusty blood, a mishmash list of demons, devils, and dark gods evoked.
Much of the enemy AI in the game are prompted off of scripted commands across most chapters in the game, but we'll have interesting dialogue to add to the experience overall, with many enemies taunting Max or casually talking amongst themselves.
Just signing the dotted line with your blood.
Progression through the game's levels is mostly linear, while occasionally incorporating puzzle-solving elements and platforming. The platforming elements of this game are maybe the most frustrating moments in the game, while Max's overall movement being very quick and erratic, making these platforming moments very frustrating, which is memorable mostly for rage quits. For example, at the beginning of Part 2, the Nightmare sequence, being one of the most irritating, game-breaking moments of the entire game. But it is relatively short, so getting through this gets you back to the action, as there are only a handful of these scenarios throughout the game. The game's story is often advanced in-game by the player following Max's internal dialogue as the character determines what his next steps will be, breaking in between and during most levels in the game in order to deliver large story beats via graphic novel-style interlude panels. In addition to the game's standard difficulty, titled Fugitive, the game also features other difficulties, such as Hard Boiled, which increases the difficulty by limiting health and ammo supplies, while increasing the overall damage that Max takes. Another difficulty, titled Dead on Arrival, limits the player to only 7 saves per chapter. And another difficulty, titled New York Minute, has the player complete chapters within an allotted time period. As the game progresses, another main character by the name of Mona Sachs is introduced in the game's graphic novel-style story panels. Mona Sachs, voiced by Julia Murney, is the twin sister of in-game character Lisa Punchinello, and is a contract killer. She has a grudge against her sister's abusive husband, mafia boss, Angelo Punchinello, whom she desires to kill. And later, after Punchinello is killed, she sides with the game's main antagonist, McKiLL Horn, who hires her to kill Max, and later finds herself unable to do so, as she sees Max as a good person. But after failing to do so, she is shot in the head by one of Horn's henchmen inside an elevator towards the end of the game. Although it is implied that she somehow survived, her body is later missing from the elevator. This game's story is very good and interesting. It's a story that takes many turns, but across Max's journey of retribution, he finds himself at odds with a number of intriguing villain characters, such as Jack Lapino, seen here, the Devil Worshipper. Later on, Mafia boss Angelo Punchinello, and of course the main antagonist of McKiLL Horn, who is ultimately responsible for the murdering of Max's wife and daughter.
Nothing personal.
This is a story you really have to experience to take it all in, as the game manages to get very dark with its direction as the game progresses. And even though this game was released nearly 22 years ago, I don't want to spoil this dark tale for anyone who hasn't experienced it for themselves. So, we'll leave the story dive as a vague summary of the events of the game, as mentioned previously.
Lapino's corpse. A comedian, huh?
Max Payne's origins reach all the way back to 1996, when Remedy Entertainment began development of an idea of a third-person shooter action game. After completing the game Death Rally, the game would originally be inspired by games like Loaded and Tomb Raider, but obviously would go in a different direction as far as camera angles and as well as overall story and settings. The game's main writer, Sam Lake, had a vision of a hard-boiled detective as a main character of a game, with a much deeper, more psychological story. So the game began development under two working titles, Max Heat and Dark Justice, before finally settling in on the title of Max Payne.
No, please God, no.
To cut costs in development, the developers ultimately chose to go with the comic book panels and voiceovers as opposed to the traditional fully animated cutscenes. Although the game's engine was used for some action-oriented cutscenes. Max Payne was originally set to debut in the summer of 1999, but was later delayed and heavily revamped in 2000. Particularly, the game's graphics were improved to feature more realistic lighting and textures, and a multiplayer feature was dropped, and the game would focus on a single-player story instead.
And I was tied to a chair. Pissing him off was the smart thing to do.
So, after initial release, Max Payne reached roughly around 82,000 copies sold within the first month, and became a top 20 selling computer game in the US back in the year 2001, and later on, with sales of the PC port and PlayStation 2 combining for nearly $60 million in revenue by 2006.
Let's take a break. I need to take a leak and maybe grab a
And
cold one
upon
at the bar.
release of Max Payne,
Don't
the game
worry.
was met with
I'll be
mostly
back to
positive
finish this
reviews,
off.
with many critics
then
praising the game's overall
check out
atmosphere, as well as level and sound design,
Bastard.
while also praising
He
the story,
swaggered out, and the
although
door
some
clanged shut behind
mentioned
him,
the
locks
story
clicking
to
into
be
place.
predictable at times, and to be full of
Everyone makes
cliches.
mistakes. Mine hadn't been to crack jokes about the goon with the bat. He'd have cracked my
The few
skull regardless.
nitpicks that critics had with the
hadn't even
game
been to trust
upon
a mill
initial
with a gun.
reviews were the lack of replay value,
I had
as
blindly
well
gone
as
after
the
first
absence
bag
of
by
any
my hip just
multiplayer
when I should have
modes.
been aiming further up the
But the
ladder.
game would go
At the head
on
of the
to win many
Punchinello
annual
family.
awards in the year 2001,
bring
including
myself to be
Best
pissed at
New
Mona.
PC
Guess I
Game
had a soft
across
spot for
Europe,
her pretty face.
as well as GameSpot naming Max Payne a top 10 console game that year,
But
just to
when
name
somebody
some early
decides to play
achievements
baseball with your head,
to the game.
you tend to get
From my
sore.
personal experience with the game, I first played Max
dragged me
Payne
back to
on
the
the
basement of
PlayStation
Lupino's
2
hotel.
back in
I was beaten,
2002
bruised, and
or
blue. I felt
2003
like
or
the chair
so.
I'd broken to get free.
I remember really liking the gritty, dark storytelling direction of the game. But one thing I remember initially
had was
thinking
Niagara's
was
bat,
the game's controls
sticky
weren't
with
my
my own
favorite
blood.
thing. First thing I did upon playing Max Payne was turn off inverted aiming, as this made the game almost unplayable. But after
Without a
turning it
gun,
off
I'd be no
in the
match for
options
Frankie's
menu
men.
and adjusting
I'd have
some
to play
turn
hide and seek with them.
sensitivities and things like this, the game controlled fine, and I went on to really enjoy this game, as I consider it a classic. And I recently replayed this game all these years later, while preparing to make this retrospective video.
Looking good.
The game holds up.
Max,
I do think
we
this game
gotta
has
stop
replay
meeting like
value.
this.
It
It holds up great, as I own 2 copies. One on the PlayStation 4, which is basically the PlayStation 2 version,
Relax, Max.
as well
You're a nice
as the
guy.
PC,
I don't kill
which I
nice
consider to be
guys.
the best
You're
port
not
of
bad
Max Payne.
yourself.
It was different when
I
Horn
used
wanted
both
Punchinello
versions
dead to cut her
to put
ties
this
with the
video
mafia.
together,
He
and the
deserved
game
to die.
performs fine on both
Intimately.
ports,
They hungered for
besides
revenge.
an occasional freeze up on the PlayStation 4.
A gunshot boomed and she fell down in slow motion.
Ultimately,
nice
this is
girl.
a fun game
Not really a
with a
stone-cold
dark,
killer.
intriguing
And now
story
she was stone
and
cold
setting.
dead.
Max's
Religious
story
fanatics or loyal samurai
is a
Horn's
cold
private army
tale
was coming
of
at me.
pain and suffering, with gameplay that is action-packed, with exciting twists and turns along the way. Max Payne is still available across many different consoles, and if you haven't experienced this game, I recommend playing it. And don't worry, I know we covered some key points of the story, but really,
When the elevator
this
came
game
back down, Mona was
is
gone.
still one
There
you'll
was a
have
lot
to
of blood,
experience
but
for
no
yourself
body.
ultimately.
Something clicked for the final time. My mind had never been so clear, as if somewhere high above
Ultimately,
the storm
Max
clouds
Payne
were
is a
already
true
gone,
classic
cold
game,
stars blazing
one
from
that will
black
always
skies.
be remembered. It has a die-hard fan base. And ultimately, this is my favorite entry into the series, as I feel it is the most memorable game. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please be cool enough to hit that like button real quick. It only takes a second, as it really helps my channel out. And
No
if you are
begging,
interested
no
in seeing
bribes.
more games
She
like
knew better.
this,
Honor
please
among
consider
killers.
subscribing
We
to
were
this
about
channel
to
for more
die.
content
Both of
just
us
like
knew how
this.
would end, in pain
We've
and
still
suffering.
only been a channel
All this
on
because your
YouTube for
wife
less than a
stuck her
year,
nose into things
with a
that
lot
were
of
none
room
of
to
her
grow.
business.
So
The
all
cops were coming to
support
take
for this
me away.
channel
The
is
sirens
welcomed
were like
and
a bad
appreciated.
conscience I couldn't shake.
And
It's
moving
ridiculous
forward
you've
with
made
this
it this
channel,
far.
I plan on trying to
You won't
put
be
out at
alive when
least
you're
2
ready.
videos a month, as we continue to cover more retro and horror games, as we continue to try to grow this channel. But until next time, this has been McKiLL TV's Max Payne Retrospective.
They were all dead. The final gunshot was an exclamation mark to everything that had led to this point. I released my finger from the trigger.